Okay, I think we'll just get going because if we keep waiting, then we're losing time, and again, this will not get done. And under any circumstances, I would like to finish this today. Sorry about that. So just let me take you back a bit. Let me just tell you that for all the criticism leveled, this is a point that I don't want you to lose sight of, because we'll keep returning to it as we are doing today's class. Okay. So right then, this is what you have to keep in mind when we are talking about what exactly happened. Because a number of people uh, ask, uh, whenever I talk about liberalization of the Indian economy, and when I say liberalization, please remember that it is total liberalization. Some bit of liberalization was always there because we were a part of the global economy anyway. But we kept a bit of the Indian economy uh, closed uh, from the global economy. And that is where we went in for some kind of indigenous development. Now, when I talk about indigenous development, I'm not saying that we developed technologies. We did not develop technologies. What we did was that when we went and asked uh, somebody for support in building up our industries, what we insisted on was that which is called transfer of technology, or TOT as it is uh, famously referred to now. So we have had all kinds of relationships with various different nations, but though our single most support uh, came from the Russians or the Soviets, that's a better word, from when it came to building up of industries like BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, then BEML, Bharat Earth Movers Limited, Bharat Heavy Vessels, that also came under this thing. Vessels or not vessels, a heavy vessel there is uh, uh, what I, you know, containers. And then we had uh, the building up of, sorry, we had the building up of, uh, uh, the ships. So we had shipyards which were able to build our own ships for us, both for the merchant navy and for the Indian Navy. So it's not like we did not have any kind of transfer of technology at all. That is wrong completely. Uh, Today we still use the MiG-21s, which is a vintage aircraft, but it is not the vintage, it is not the MiG-21 that the Russians had built. This is a very, very different version of the MiG-21. This is actually called the MiG-21 Bison, Bison, and this is built at HAL. And this particular this particular aircraft's avionics and weapon carrying abilities were those which were substantially increased by using electronics from other parts of the world and not just from the Russians. We had electronics coming from Israel. Very few people know this, that we've actually had defense relations with Israel from a very long time back, even when we now vocally supported the Palestinian cause, we still kept a trade pact with Israel. It was not just for military technology. Sorry. It was also the ability of Israel to grow plants in rain shadow regions. So we built that ability by going to Israel, taking a little bit of help. And if you know about the ICRISAT in Hyderabad, it stands for International Crop Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics. ICRISAT, it comes after BHEL, uh, somewhere towards Patancheru. And this particular institute has been functional for a very, very long time. It continues to be functional as an international institute, and this has done pioneering contributions to agriculture in the country. Okay, please don't ever underestimate the strength of the agricultural sector. It is a very important sector, not just because of the fact that it provides us food to eat. It is also the one sector that gives us uh, raw material for building up other industries. So the agriculture sector was never neglected, though there are critics of Nehru who say that in the very first 5 year plan, he started talking about industries at the expense of agriculture. These people have not read the 5 year plan documents. If you read the 5 year plan documents, you will find that a substantial sum was allocated for agricultural development. There is no doubt about that at all. And I've talked at length about the education system, so I'm not going to waste your and my time going back on those kind of issues. But one thing that we need to talk about just a bit is this democratic centralism. So, democratic centralism is something that we borrowed from the USSR along with the idea of the 5 year plans. And the 5 year plans were actually, and democratic centralism, were actually the ideas of Lenin. Uh, Unfortunately, communism has, thanks to the American propaganda, and thanks in greater measure to Joseph Stalin, who I think desecrated the term communism through his policies of vindictive dictatorship. It wasn't an ordinary dictatorship, it was a vindictive dictatorship. And so it was completely tarnished the reputation of communism and the USSR, so much so that his successor,
Sir,
yes, please.
what is the difference between United and Union, sir?
Not much. A union is where you have formed into a union, When you say that we are now a union, it is a more formal, uh, what should I say? It's a more formal agreement uh, than united, which is a little more flexible and less formal, in the sense that on this issue we stand united, but on other issues, no, we have our differences of opinion. That is how you can use united. Okay, but you can't use union like that. Union is to form a consolidation of a number of people or number of territories in an irrevocable manner. When they come together, they become a union. And that is why, if you read our constitution, and that is the point I was just going to come to, given the fact that, please don't attach too much significance to the story that it was the British who used the divide and conquer policy in India. That is not true. We have always had a tendency to divide ourselves. Okay, we have had a very, very bad tendency to to divide ourselves, and the British success in India, in a large part, is mainly due to the fact that the princely states that were fighting wars with each other, not princely states, the principalities that were fighting wars with each other, whenever they felt that they were a little weak, they asked for the help of the British. So it was a good opportunity for them to get involved in all these things. So they had been invited by the Bahamanis to come and help them, by Sirajud-Dowla to come and help them. So there are all kinds of instances of the British being invited for help by. So please read any Indian history book. You should, and you will see how many battles were fought by the British on Indian soil at the invitation of the Indian principalities. So it is not as if uh, they divided us. We were also united. We were strong. We never were. We never were. We always had all kinds of hierarchies. But that is not to say that we were not a cultural nation. I have spoken to you in the past about our being a cultural nation. That also was there. But it is the rulers who were divided, not the people. See, the people hardly matter in these, okay? They don't really matter. It's it's at the instance of some kind of a leader or ruler that people come into the picture. Otherwise, on their own, people don't start anything. People don't start anything unless and until a politician, or if you're looking at the past, a prince or a king or somebody like that initiated a particular process. So a union is basically an irrevocable coming together, no going back on that. And that is the reason why the word, though we have two, three levels of governance, uh, we never ever use the word federal anywhere in the Constitution, even with amendments. Even with amendments, we have never used the word federal. We have only used the term union. India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. And the best part is, at that particular time, when this line was written as a part of our Indian Constitution, the States Reorganization Committee had not yet even finished its job of identifying how to create states. How to create states. Now, so let's take three situations. Now that you asked that question, uh, I have to answer that. The United States of America. Now, there you have different colonies set up by the colonial powers themselves. And what did they do? They recreated their own uh, native places. So, like I said, most of the places in America are those which are named after places from where the immigrant settlers went and gave it that name. So, there is a York in England, which becomes New York in America. Okay, so uh, this is especially true of the New England states, the 13 of them. There's a Connecticut in Britain, and that becomes Connecticut on again in um, sorry, in America. And if you see these things, you see that first they had the formation of these states. They began as colonial settlements, but ultimately upgraded themselves to the status of states. And what they had done after that, when they came together, the first 13 states, uh, they called themselves the United States of America, because they didn't want to let go of their uh, they didn't really want to let go uh, of their what should I say, their identity. And there was a time when the governor of a state was more powerful than the president of the United States of America. And if you know your international relations well, you will know that till the end of the 19th century, America followed a policy of isolationism. Okay, they didn't want to interact with the rest of the world. They didn't care about the rest of the world. They had bountiful reserves there of everything. And so they were living in splendid isolation. And at that particular time, the federal, even though after this civil war, which ended in 1865, after the Civil War ended, uh, the Americans did say that they were a union of states. They also used the word union of states in their constitution because they wanted to make sure, because the Confederates who were on the southern side, especially Texas, Louisiana, then which were the other, Nebraska, all these kind of states, they were looking at breaking away from the United States of America. So in order to consolidate the Union, it's only then that the the if you look at the time of the writing of the American Constitution, there was this man called John Jay, Jay, and John Jay had written what are called the Federalist Papers, or they are now simply called the Federalist. Uh, and the Federalist is a document that was laying out a blueprint for federalism of America. But as the number of states increased, as the diversity increased, and when people were trying to break away the Confederation, were trying to break away. Confederation is not very different from federation in meaning, by the way. If you want to know the terminological difference, there is hardly any difference. They can be used interchangeably. Confederation, federation, both are almost the same. So it was at that time that they inserted the word unionists. Those who didn't want the breaking up of the United States of America, they called themselves unionists. And those who wanted the breaking up, they called themselves Confederates. The Confederates also have a different flag. They have a completely different flag. And anyway, so what I'm trying to tell you is, even though it is United States of America, ultimately they also used Union of States, but they do have the word federal figuring very prominently in almost everything. You have the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you have the Federal Supreme Court, you have the federal government. Okay, once the threat of the Civil War had passed, the word federal came back into circulation in a big way. In the United States, if that was the case, in the Soviet Union, the case was completely different. Uh, there, they were seeing what I told you yesterday was enclave development, which is some areas were more developed than other areas. The other areas that were not very developed were the Central Asian republics, which originally were places like Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. I don't know, there are quite a few of these, and Tajikistan. So we can go on about these, but I'm not going to. And Byelorusia, as it was then called, and Belarus, as it is called today. Incidentally, even the pronunciation Russia is wrong. It is Rusia. Okay, and somehow Indian languages have this knack of getting the correct pronunciations. Uh, in Hindi, we call Russia Rus, and Russia is actually the pronunciation of Russia. Uh, and Belarus is Byelorussia, translated back into their own language, which is Russian technically, but we call Russian. Uh, so anyway, so they decided that they'll form a union because they didn't want people to feel that they were not getting a proper treatment from the developed parts. So they use that term union in order to try and bring about parity in development. And in India, we use the term union because of our well known tendency to divide ourselves because of our well-known tendency to divide ourselves, and we never ever used the term we never ever used the term federal or any of its derivatives anywhere in the constitution or any official documents uh, that are issued by the government of India. Okay, we have always been a union and we have believed in the center. So let's be very clear that we believed in centralization. So when we wrote this constitution, where were the states? There were no states. There were 520 principalities or something. We couldn't administer a country with 520 states, could we? So the linguistic state proposal gained currency, and it was because of Potti Sriramalu giving his life, and that is when the linguistic states were created. Okay, so in the case of India, we first had the creation of the whole, and then we had the creation of the parts. Okay, and then we had the creation of the parts because reorganization, please remember that it was the States Reorganization Committee. Reorganization, why didn't they call it organization? Because there were already these different kinds of states in India, some of which were principalities, some of which were creations of the British, okay, and some of them, like the recalcitrant Hyderabad state, the Portuguese not wanting to let go of Goa. So you had all these different kinds of problems, right? And so it was up basically to uh, create a centralized system. It was really, really a necessity they felt, the founding fathers of the, not just the constitution, of the nation. The founding fathers of the nation wanted this to be called a union of states with greater centralization of powers. It's just that we are such a big country that we can't rule with only one level of government. So we created the second tier, which is the state government, and that came in only after the states were created by the States Reorganization Committee. And none of the states that were created by the States Reorganization Committee had any of their boundaries corresponding to any of the pre-existing states or principalities or presidencies or whatever that existed. Pre-existing doesn't mean I have to say existing again. Pre-existing boundaries uh, before independence. None of them, there were no more except perhaps Jammu and Kashmir, which was a bone of contention. So apart from that, none of them were ever uh, recreated in the same uh, with the same boundaries that they once had. So you therefore will see that we were first India. We became India first, and several years later, and I mean that several years later, when the States Reorganization Committee finally decided, okay, it is the linguistic states which is the best way forward, a suggestion to this effect was vaguely made by Mahatma Gandhi, sorry, to Nehru when there was talk of reorganization, but it wasn't a very serious thing. He didn't insist on it. But that was something that Potti Sriramalu latched onto, went on a fast and died. And so Nehru, it was a very different kind of politics than all the rubbish you hear about him and all is nonsense. He felt very bad that his not uh, his not listening to Potesri Ramalu led to the death of a person And he said in independent India, a person has died doing satyagraha, and he said that is a blot on my government. Okay, so that's what he said at that time. Uh, he basically said this: it's a blot on my government. And so the States Reorganization Committee took up the linguistic states formation. There are a lot of politics around the formation of the linguistic states, into which I cannot go to. If it was a paper on Indian government and politics, I definitely would have gone into those things. But this is not the paper to do that kind of a thing. So, this democratic centralism, please understand, the democratic centralism was that there was a consensus that we need centralization. We should not have too much power given to the states. And that is why, if you look at the lists, you might have studied that in your BA. And I don't know if you're having your Indian government and politics classes. I am not sure of that. But you had these three lists: the states list, the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. And what does a concurrent list say? A state can pass legislation, but if suddenly there is a decision by, if there is suddenly a decision contrary to a legislation passed by the um, union government, then, or the central government, then it is a legislation of the central government which stands, and not the legislation of the union, the state government. Okay, that is what it says. Now, the third tier was actually, I think, a reluctant, agreeing to of Gandhi's idea of a Panchayat Raj. Uh, I don't think Gandhi would have cared if this Panchayat Raj system existed or not. Gandhi's idea of Panchayat Raj was that the country will be organized as villages, and that too self-sufficient villages, no industries, only artisan economy. And Gram Swaraj was his slogan. So for him, this little small piece of bone that you throw to a dog, that wouldn't really have mattered, because ultimately the system was not what he wanted. We went in for industries, we went in for industrial development, and we went in for all those, and never was Gram Swaraj talked about. Does anyone even today talk about Gram Swaraj? No, we talk about Gram Sabha, which we say is uh, the most primary form of the legislature. And we know that is all rubbish. From 1965, so many states did not even hold Panchayat Raj elections right through to the 1990s, 1980s, I'm sorry. And that is when they had to create those amendments, 73rd and 74th amendments, to make it mandatory for the Panchayat Raj institutions to have regular elections and all that. But that's a whole big confusion that did not contribute to anything, and certainly not what Gandhi wanted. So talking about that, that's a redundant tier, okay, because they can't generate their own economy. Even the states cannot generate their own economy. Original this thing, if the state was collecting a tax, giving it to the center. I told you about the interstate council. It was finally up to the interstate council, uh, it is finally up to the interstate council to this stupid dog. Shut up. Sorry. Uh, it was the interstate council um, that was supposed to basically take care of fund allocations. That didn't happen, and you had the planning commission being brought in, an extra constitutional body which today exists as Niti Aayog. Uh, Now, one thing that you have to understand is that the 5-year plans were borrowed from the USSR, as was democratic centralism. And this is because of the fact that India also had enclave development with the littoral states. I'm not going to go back into this, please. You know what the littoral areas, not states. The four presidencies and the three presidencies that were ports, plus some other ports like uh, you find some development in Surat, you find in Calicut, you find in Cochin, and you'll also find a little bit in Vishakhapatnam, which the British called Voltaire, uh, and I don't know why. Uh, why Zag, I can understand, but Voltaire is something that beats me completely. And then they also tried to, the Nizam developed the Machilipatnam, uh, Machilipatnam port, because the Nizam, the Hyderabad state was a landlocked state, and the Nizam wanted a port for trading. Ports were very important in those days because we didn't have aircraft like we have today, cargo aircraft that can carry vast amounts of cargo. So the Nizam development, the Machilipatnam, developed the Machilipatnam port, and the city that benefited from that was Vijayawada, which became a business center. And I told you that along with Machilipatnam, Vijayawada and Guntur, they came to be called the Sarkar districts. Sarkar, the British wrote Sirkar, C-I-R, C-A-R, but it should be S-A-R-K-A-R, Sarkar, Nizam Sarkar. That is where it came from. So technically, they are not a part of Andhra. If you want a separate Telangana, those people also should have been included in this because they were under the rule of the British, of the Nizam by all these things. And so the point I'm trying to make is that the port saw some kind of development, and Hyderabad was the exception. And that speaks volumes for two Nizams, Mehboob Ali Khan and Usman Ali Khan, Mir Mehboob Ali Khan Pasha and Mir Usman Ali Khan Pasha, especially the latter, especially the latter, uh, who did almost all the great developments. Uh, so, a man much maligned because of the Razakar movement, but there is an alternative story to that, which is Qasim Razvi. He was not from Hyderabad. he was a Lucknowi, finding that he couldn't do anything from Lucknow, came here and started the Razakar movement. Uh, the atrocities that were committed under the Razakar movement are attributable to Qasim Razvi and not to the Nizam of Hyderabad, because Qasim Razvi actually snatched the power away from the Nizam of Hyderabad. He took all powers away. Okay, this is a not so well known story about Hyderabad state. And the idea that Hyderabad would be ceded to Pakistan was again Qasim Razvi's. Uh, there is no recorded utterance of that sort from Usman Ali Khan Pasha. So, what we are talking about is some parts being developed, other parts being totally undeveloped and underdeveloped. And I told you the difference between the two. Underdeveloped is losing whatever development you had. Undeveloped is, not developing at all. So the undeveloped parts would correspond with Chhattisgarh, which is mainly a tribal area, uh, and the whole of what was once Madhya Pradesh and has now unfortunately been bifurcated to create a Chhattisgarh. It did not nobody any good. Uh, Again, the same thing with Jharkhand and Bihar. It did nobody any good bifurcating these two that state into two. And then, of course, the Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh. Uttarakhand did see some development, but not uh, the rest of Uttar Pradesh. These were really the undeveloped parts up north, and Rajasthan. Uh, Chronic backwardness due to in the climate there being totally non-conducive for any kind of agriculture and any kind of artisans. So uh, even today, people walk almost 20 kilometers up and down to fetch themselves a pot of drinking water in areas of Rajasthan. And that's why when people leave taps on, I tell them, please don't do that. You don't know how precious this reserve is, because there are people who walk 20 kilometers just for one pot of water. So don't run water when you don't need it. Don't do that, is what I tell people. So you had all these backward areas. And Nehru, since he had a bit of Fabian socialism in him, and since he admired the way Lenin led the USSR in its initial years, he decided that he was going to do something similar, and that is how democratic centralism came. So there are two factors behind democratic centralism. One is the tendency of the country to divide itself. Okay, tendency among not the people, but the leadership in the country to divide itself. And that has again been shown wonderfully in the case of Telangana. Okay, look at the anatomy of the Telangana movement, separate Telangana movement. There was one in 1969. Indira Gandhi put it down brutally, made a speech in the parliament. She said, "What do you think this is? Tomorrow, every district, every village will get up and say, I want to be a state on my own. And if we accede to this kind of a request, then we open ourselves to all kinds of Pandora's boxes." She said, "There's nothing wrong. There is no reason why there should be any kind of division of the state. It has been done after proper consideration by the state's reorganization committee, and there is nothing to suggest, that there is a need for a separate Telangana. Okay, and then you have the second Telangana movement. And once the first Telangana movement was put down, and Mrs. Gandhi was a leader of the highest caliber, she knew how to deal with people. She knew how to deal all these Chennarreddies and all, small time manipulators. She just crushed them like ants. Just like ants, she crushed them. Okay. And they couldn't do a thing. They couldn't do a thing. Then, why did the second movement come? The first movement died, people were happy, they were living, except for the Reddys. I'm saying it openly because they felt that they had been dispossessed of the power that they enjoyed in Telangana, especially with the dissolution of the hereditary offices that were there at the village level, which were the offices of the Police Patel, Mali Patel. These were all held by families. The Patwari, and if it was a Brahmin who was a head, he would be called a Karnam. Karnams were those who wrote Karnamas. That's why they became Karnams. Patwaris didn't write Karnamas, and therefore they are not uh, called Karnams. Patwaris could belong to any caste, uh, but Karnams were Brahmins. Uh, People will tell you that this is a word from coastal Andhra. It is not. In coastal Andhra, there is no system of either the Patwari or the uh, Karnam. In coastal Andhra, what they followed was a system of a Mansabdar and a Subedar, okay, which was a creation of the Mughal Empire, and the British continued with that, okay. They continued with that system, and so you see, once NTR came here as chief minister and abolished the hereditary offices that were there here still, uh, then that led to a lot of heartburn among those people who were holding these hereditary offices. And therefore, the whole complexion changed into a caste warfare. It changed into a caste warfare. But nobody, I mean, after what Indira Gandhi had done, nobody really was in a position to, or nobody actually thought it possible that you could have a separate Telangana movement again until two things happened. One is the rise of Chandrababu Naidu, and the other is the weakening of the center. As long as a strong center existed, nobody opened their mouths here. Andhra Pradesh was Andhra Pradesh, right? But once you had coalition governments in the center, and once this BJP took up this agenda of dividing states, they thought if they create new states, then they'll get a foothold. Because the BJP has always been struggling for a foothold. Somebody once commented that the biggest achievement of Atal Bihari Vajpayee and uh, L.K. Advani is that if you set their communal politics aside, if you set that aside, though that was the actual means, what they managed to do was to take the BJP from 2 seats in the parliament to 2 seats in the parliament. They could take it to 140. That is when the NDA started forming against the Congress, because nobody wanted to be ruled by Sonia Gandhi and all these things. So that came in as a big asset to this movement. And if only, and just look at our present chief minister, who named his son, he was a fan of N.T. Ramarao. Okay, he stopped short of naming his son N.T. Ramarao. I think he somehow felt embarrassed if he named him N.T. Ramarao. So then that would mean that he's also taking an Ramarao's surname. So he made him K.T. Ramarao, Taraka Ramarao. He's named after NTR. Okay, and he started the movement. Why? Because of the fact that he was denied a ministry that he wanted, and adding insult to injury, he was given deputy speakership. Chandrababu Naidu, a very bad manipulator, unnecessary manipulator. Uh, so that gave rise to this movement. That gave rise to this movement. And who do you have in power? A lady who doesn't know her front end from her back, top from the bottom. She gives the freedom on the not freedom, the separate state, on the recommendations of one person who convinced her that if you don't give this state, you'll be wiped away nationally. And this man who gave her that advice, Jayapal Reddy, never won an election on his own properly. They always had to find a safe constituency for him to win. He had no standing among the people. Okay. And on his advice, she gave separate Telangana. And what he said will happen if she doesn't give separate Telangana happened after she gave Telangana. The Congress wiped out, completely wiped out. Okay. Now, that has nothing to do with Telangana. I'm just trying to tell you that such is the poor quality of leadership. They have a brilliant man in their ranks. He should have been allowed to act as a prime minister on his own terms. Instead of that, you dictated terms to him. And that's what happens. You have all idiotic policies, idiotic things happening. And hence, the party just got wiped out. This was actually a bastion of that party, and it got wiped out here. So, anyway, to come back to the federal component. Now, democratic centralism and the Planning Commission worked as long as there was a strong central government. But with the rise of coalition governments from 1989, from 1989, we have seen the rise of coalition So it's just not a coalition government. You will see that you have these regional parties that were family oriented. Okay, there's a good word for that in English, you know, regional satraps. Look at what happened. Hmm? You have, at that time, I'm talking about 1989, uh, in that particular time, you had these two states, West Bengal. I don't know why it's called West Bengal. I keep saying that again and again. West Bengal and I suppose we have to call it East Kerala. I don't know, or West Kerala. Uh, so there is Kerala, both of which had uh, an LDF, or the Communist Party of India, Marxist, which split from the main Communist Party in 1964. That became the ruling party in the West Bengal under Jyoti Basu. And uh, in the Kerala region, it was the CPIM with other coalition partners. But if you look at Tamil Nadu, it was MG Ramchandran and Jayalalitha on one hand, and on the other, Karunanidhi and his family. And after NG Ramachandran's death, which happened around that time only, uh, it became Jayalalitha's party. So it was her family party. So Shashikala became Chinnamma, and Jayalalitha became Amma. So you have all these people uh, there. And then you also have N.T. Ramarao, who made this his own family thing. Well, he lost one election, but he did come back into power, and then it was snatched away from him by his devious son-in-law. Uh, so this was another party, Telugu Desam, that belonged to one caste, the Kamma caste. They call themselves Chaudharis, but they have nothing to do with the Chauta tax. So they are not Chaudharis, they are Kammas. It belonged to the Kamma caste. And then you have up north the Samajwadi Party, Mulayam Singh Yadav and his family. Then you have the Bihar thing, where you have Rashtriya Janata Dal, uh, Lalu Prasad Yadav and his family. And when the UPA was in power, then it was the biggest family of them all, the Nehru Gandhi family. Okay, so we had this system where we had family based parties ruling the roost in the country, and none of them had any great capable leadership, nothing. So federalism started happening with somebody like uh, Chandrababu Naidu, who was more of a businessman than a politician, which was in a way good, which was in a way very good, because if he had thought like a politician, then the development that we saw in Hyderabad would not have happened. Now, what we find is, I told you yesterday, Chandrababu Naidu started the trend because he was supporting uh, out of 42 MPs who were elected from Andhra Pradesh. Uh, at one time, he had 32 MPs. That is when he was really very powerful. And then you will see that he was um still powerful when it came down to 21 or something. But a stage came where he could twist the arms of the center with even 6 members because they required them. So he twisted the arms of the center. He made his focus Hyderabad, and he basically brought in all these global companies through invitations. He didn't act like the politicians previously did, which was, sit like this and talk to the people. He chased investors. Okay. So uh, he chased investors. He chased the World Bank for loans. He got soft loans as a part. I hope you remember that part about liberalization. So he got these loans from the uh, World Bank directly, and he told the center, we'll service these loans. Seeing him, Karnataka started doing the same thing because his competitor was SM Krishna. Karnataka started doing the same thing. They also approached the World Bank and the IMF. And then it was Jayalalitha's turn, and she said, if these two people can do it, why not me? So she went even in a bigger way, and she had far more advantages than both Hyderabad and Bangalore had. So she was able to create not just a software kind of a thing, but she was also able to create a huge manufacturing base. And Maharashtra joined the race. Maharashtra joined the race and said, oh, these guys are doing it. We are the traditional, supposedly the commercial capital of the country. So they went in. There's not much space in Mumbai, so they developed Pune. They developed Pune into a manufacturing hub and also a software hub. It didn't take off so much as a software hub as it took off as a manufacturing hub. And Pune also has a wealth of good educational institutions, which is not what you can say of both Bangalore and Hyderabad. Uh, and sorry. Uh, so you have Chandrababu Naidu creating an ISB. When he asked for an IIM and didn't get it, he said, okay, I'll go to the industry. He brought all the industrialists together and he created this ISB. And it's now a legendary institution. Uh, and he also was able to get the IIT. He wanted to set it at Basar, but Rajshekhar Reddy, I think, was a little more clever, and he brought it to Hyderabad. And if Rajshekhar Reddy hadn't died, an IIM would have come. It was on the anvil. Okay, unfortunately, Rajshekhar Reddy died for the state. Even though he was also scheming, he was, unlike Chandrababu Naidu, he was able to draw a balance between business and politics, which is an amazing achievement and which makes me respect Rajshekhar Reddy not as a person but as a leader. YS Rajshekhar Reddy knew where to do business and where to do uh, politics. He knew that. Chandrababu Naidu unfortunately didn't know that. And for happily for Rajshekhar Reddy, his chief ministership coincided with the UPA being in power. And therefore, he was able to carry on the developmental activity. He was able to carry on with the developmental activity. He was a linchpin of the UPA, a thing that very, very few people know. Very, very few people know. He is a linchpin. His son is nothing, nor is his daughter. Okay. But the son has become a satrap. I don't think he has any opposition left in the Andhra Pradesh state. We have a new satrap here, KCR and his family. So federalism came, and along with that came all these people, the satraps. Okay, families, family-based politics. Now, once the BJP has started winning on its own, and this time, the last time out, it had a very good performance. So now they feel they don't need anyone else. And oh yeah, while talking about the federalism, after Maharashtra, Gujarat, Mr. Modi, Narendra Modi decided if all these states and all these fellows can go out and uh, get loans from the World Bank for themselves, why not me? So Narendra Modi also made Gujarat a federating unit rather than just a state. And so you see, there's some kind of federalism actually came into being. Because once you start the financing of states directly, directly by the World Bank and the IMF, then that is federalism. Unfortunately, the federalism that took shape became competitive federalism. Okay, the South Indian states showed greater dynamism of the capitalist variety, which led them to compete with each other. And Gujarat, Maharashtra, Gujaratis are traditional businesses. So they knew how to get onto the bandwagon. Maharashtra, they also knew. They had all round development for many years. So you have to add Gujarat to that list. Gujarat, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, uh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and uh, what else? Did I miss out anything? Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. Yes, Bengal got into the act with the CPIM, and then it is now Mamata Banerjee, of course. Uh, she undid the Tatas there, uh, but she stamped her authority, and now Bengal is doing its own kind of thing. So yes, so you have federalism now of some variety. It's not the kind of federalism that you see in countries like America. No, not that kind of federalism. But the states are now pretty powerful in their own way. But with the BJP becoming more and more powerful, there is again a tendency to go the Indira Gandhi way, which is, you know, centralization. Centralization is what they want because ultimately, in the scheme of politics, they will want that. But I don't want to get into why they would want centralization. That will become Indian government and politics. This is about neoliberalism. Please don't forget that. So, what that whether you call it neoliberalism or revival of classical liberalism, they're all the same. Uh, I don't like that term neoliberalism. There have been critics, but India had to go in for neoliberalism. It didn't have any other options. It had to go in for liberalization. I'm sorry. And please remember that globalization started with colonialism. That has nothing to do with 1990s. Okay, not just in India, anywhere in the world. Globalization started with colonialism, and Lenin was very right when he said colonialism, the highest form of capitalism. So his description of that is extremely appropriate. And colonialism globalized the world. It globalized the world in different ways. In different ways. The impact of globalization is not uniform in different parts of the world. It's been different in Africa, it's been different in Latin America, it's been different in India, it's been different in China, it's been different in Southeast Asia. But globalization did start. There is a world economy, and people kept arguing that there was no hope for communism. There was no hope for communism because when the whole world is capitalist, how will you survive as a communist enclave? How will you deal with the world? You can't cut yourself off from the rest of the world. And therefore, they said communism will not survive. And that's exactly what happened. It is the lack of survival that led to the division of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, about which I have talked about. China claims that it is communist. It's not communist. They are state monopoly capitalism. What they are doing is keeping a tight control. They don't want to go the way of democracy, liberal democracy. They don't want to go that way because then they lose control over their economy. Now they are keeping a tight control. That is Deng Xiaoping. It was his idea. And the SEZs that we talk about in India, special economic zones, is a concept that we borrowed from the Chinese. The Chinese created special economic zones for development in the four provinces that I keep talking about, one which I can't remember, but the other three, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing, they created SEZs around these places. And it is in those SEZs that most of the manufacturing activity happens. And the Chinese have become ultra competitive. They don't want to lose out to India on uh, the service sector, so they are learning English. For the last 10 years, China has been driving English language education, whereas we are going in the opposite direction. We are losing the dividend that we had. We were the second largest English speaking nation in the world. Shortly, we won't be. We won't be. There are fewer and fewer people who can speak English in this country anymore. And when that reaches a critical bottom, and then you lose the service industry as well. So we don't have a great future unless we go in for English medium education. I have been castigated, criticized for saying this. I've been called a foreign agent, all because I said without English we can't progress. And well, too bad. One good thing is I don't have children to worry about what is their future. I suppose I'll be gone in a few years, so I can simply say que sera, sera, and leave it there. So, yes, sir. Open to questions. One answer to, I don't know if he's still there. Akshay Puneet, are you still there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Brain drain. Yes, you have to look at it. It's a very complicated. It's a very complicated kind of a thing to look at. It's a complicated thing because Rajiv Gandhi called it brain drain because at that particular time he wanted people in this country. He basically wanted people in this country to take development forward. Huge subsidies were being offered even on management courses, courses in IITs. Everywhere, uh, huge subsidies were being given. I remember in the 1990s, there was a report on how much a student of a social sciences university, predominantly social sciences university like JNU, was being subsidized. Uh, in JNU, every student was being subsidized to the extent of 27,000 rupees per month. Okay, that was the amount of subsidy that was being given in the 1990s to social, predominantly social science university. All right, and if you look at the IISC, the CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General's uh, the report said the subsidy exceeded 60,000. So one of the good things that PV Narasimha Rao did was that he removed the subsidies on money making courses and courses that were being uh, uh, given to people and facilitating them to go abroad. So management education became unsubsidized, completely unsubsidized. You have to pay your full fee. There is no way but paying your full fee. And he also removed subsidies to the extent of 60% in IITs. Okay. Uh, and then we see once the NDA government came, they removed even some of those subsidies. In Andhra Pradesh, uh, the undivided Andhra Pradesh, Chandrababu Naidu said every institution, university has to earn its own money. Block grants were cut by 50%. Block grants were cut by 50%. So they said you raise your own resources. And there, this kind of competitive thing came into universities. If you did research, showed proof of it, then the UGC will fund you. I told you, I got 3 centers, none of which even took off. None of which took off. If had they taken off, they would have brought in employment to research scholars, and they would have brought in at least 16 lakhs of funding every year. At least it would have actually doubled. Every year it would have doubled. A Gandhian Studies Center, an Indira Gandhi Studies Center, and a Women's Studies Center, UGC, directly. Work for the UPE, 50 crores gone. I did all this paid work because the Vice Chancellor was from our department. He said, you do it. I did the presentations in front of the team that came, but it's all gone. So I don't know what the future is, but the subsidies are going. So if people are going today, they are paying the fees and going, because now people are not even studying here. Now, for their undergraduation courses, previously they used to go for postgraduate courses, and that too, they used to look for some scholarships and fellowships, or at least some kind of library assistantship or teaching assistantship. But now people are going for undergraduate courses because disposable incomes in the country, thanks to the liberalization of the economy and the solid foundations that were there, that have led to a generation of people making a hell of a lot of money, and they are able to subsidize their children, not subsidize, they're able to pay for their children's education right from undergraduation. Right from undergraduation. So there is no question of subsidies and people misusing them now. What is happening is brain drain is happening because we don't have educational institutions. Our IITs, don't talk about them, please. They are like any glorified engineering college that you have here. Okay, like Chaitanya Bharati Institute of Technology, Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Technology, they are like that, the IITs. There was a program on NDTV that was done by Barka Dutt, and there one lady said India doesn't have a meritocracy, the IITs don't follow a meritocracy, and there was Sukhdev Thorat, who was the UGC chairman, and he said, we have history of 3,000 years, and that lady said, please spare me that nonsense. I've heard it many times over, but that is your problem. Please deal with it when you want to come to, if you want to come to America, don't don't give us this. This is not our problem. This is your problem. You take care of these, not us. So once again, the way the things are going on is that those who have already benefited will continue to benefit. Those who have not benefited will not benefit. That's it. That's the answer to your question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there's brain drain happening, but not at the expense of our government. Not anymore. They are paying their fees and going there. And they are paying these huge fees in Oak Ridge and I don't know, uh, all kinds of fancy schools have come up. They're paying lots and lots of money there. And there are consultants who start working with you from ninth class to take you away for your undergraduate studies, how to prepare for SAT, how to do this. There are consultants who have come up. The city is teeming with them, and people are going and paying and studying abroad. People are going to Purdue, people are going to Princeton, people are going to Stanford, people are going to Harvard, Yale, everything. They're not going to third rate universities, they're going to top rate universities. So there is no more this brain drain at the expense of the taxpayer. No, there is
Okay,
brain
sir.
drain. There is brain drain, yes. And it is more than ever, more than ever. And the scenario, as far as I look at it, is very bleak for the future of our own education system.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Any other?
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, India is socialistic country, no, sir.
Not
Uh,
anymore, madam. Not anymore. We are a capitalist country now. We should go back to the constitution and remove socialist and secular. We should remove them.
that's my question. While privatizing all these,
Hmm.
uh, can't we have right to protest government?
No, you can't because money government doesn't have money. That's why it's privatizing. It's not
But in
privatizing.
the constitution itself, I think
No,
socialist.
see, socialist and uh, secular were added on by the 44th Amendment by Mrs. Indira Gandhi in the 70s. Okay, the original preamble didn't carry those two terms, either the secular or the term socialist. She introduced it at that particular time. I think it is time for yet another constitutional amendment to remove those two terms. We are not
Mm,
socialist, and I don't think we are secular anymore. I don't think we are secular, not with this present government.
that means the secular is basic structure of constitution, no, sir.
Well, it is supposed to be, but well, you can write a constitution, you can write as many rules as you want, but it all depends upon implementation. Like I keep telling everybody, the helmet rule has been there from 1988 in the Motor Vehicles Act of India, which tells us that both the rider and the pillion rider will have to wear helmets. And if you're a motorcycle rider, you have to wear shoes. You cannot drive or ride a motorcycle with uh, chappals. You have to wear shoes because uh, the changing of gears is done with the feet. So that is there in the Motor Vehicles Act. People don't even know that. The police don't know that. You can actually be stopped and fined, and your bike can be seized if you are driving without shoes and some other form of footwear. So you see, a rule is only as good as its implementation. A rule is only as good as its implementation. And our implementation agencies, most of them don't know the rules. They don't know the rules. Go and ask any policeman about this. about the shoe rule? Do they know? They don't. When I say policeman, I'm not talking about the humble traffic constable. I'm talking about the circle inspector who sits and writes challans. Ask them. They don't know. Even if they know, they won't care. So a rule is only as good as its implementation. If it is not implemented, it's as good as not having that rule at all. So you can write secular, you can write whatever you want. But unless you are implementing that, you are not what you're claiming to be. I can say I'm a very thin man. That's not going to change the fact that I'm fat, right? If I write a description of myself and send it and say I'm a very thin man and I'm very good looking, it doesn't change the fact that I'm not. Yeah. Any other?
So then why don't courts interfere in this matter?
They can't.
Why?
On what basis will they interfere?
It is in the constitution itself, no sir. In the basic
So,
structure. They
so
are
no. That is not the basic structure of the Constitution. First and
secular
foremost,
and self.
no. That is not being violated directly. It is being done through underhand means. It is being done through underhand means. It is not being done very directly violating secularism. No, they are not going to. And today we have a committed judiciary. Look at what happened to that Gogoi fellow who gave that verdict in favor of the Ayodhya temple. Now he's a Rajya Sabha member. Okay, and then this Bobde, I'm sure he also has given a couple of verdicts in favor of the present government. So this Bobde will also get some kind of reward. So you have this thing called committed judiciary. They are committed to the government because they are also pursuing their own good. They are pursuing their own good. They're looking at a career after retiring from the judiciary. So courts are also not free of corruption. They are not free of corruption. Mm. Justice Narasimha Reddy, the 8th chapter of the Sri Krishna Committee report, okay, was supposed to be a confidential chapter. The 8th chapter, right? It was brought by a special plane by a special representative of the union government and given to Justice Narasimha Reddy. Okay, in those days I used to write a blog, and I wrote a blog because I had a copy of that. This so-called confidential thing, I had a Xerox copy of it. So I wrote about that in my blog. So one of the pro-Telangana people said, you can be arrested for being in contempt of court. You don't know what happened. You don't know what is there in the this thing. I told him, if you want, in this very blog, I'll publish a Xerox copy of that chapter 8. I have it with me. It was available everywhere. That is how our courts are. This top secret document is there everywhere. So courts are corrupt. Okay, I think you should go to your next class. Otherwise,
Thank
Madam Yasmin will be extremely angry with me. She will be very, very angry with me. Hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Bye.
right,
Thank you.
right.